Paul Anderson was born in Wallsend, England, and was raised in the nearby city of Newcastle upon Tyne, England. His parents, Chris, a property developer and poet, and Joan Anderson, raised him as an only child, sending him to Newcastle Royal Grammar School. From a very young age, he knew he wanted to be a filmmaker. He's described his amazement at the experience of discovering the artificiality and manufactured nature of cinema.
And I was probably about 7 years old, and it was a John Wayne film, and I kind of suddenly clicked that John Wayne wasn't really a cowboy. He was someone pretending to be a cowboy, and that this wasn't really reality, this was make-believe. This was a story that people had made and somehow got on this big screen. And as soon as I realized that movies were kind of made artifacts, I thought, that is what I want to do with my life. That's the only thing I want to do with it.
He was also enamored with video games, born out of a particular arcade game he fell in love with as a child. He recounts his first experience with the game Space Invaders in his foreword for Luke Owen's book, Lights, Camera, Game Over, How Video Game Movies Get Made. Quote, "As a young lad in northern England, I would spend summer holidays with my grandparents and the other grandkids in Scarborough. A bleak, windy coastal resort, Scarborough's main attraction for me was the arcades packed with the latest pinball machines. Pinball machines were edgy and fun. Even The Who had sung about them. Then one night something new materialized in the pinball arcade. A big black upright slab, like the monolith in Kubrick's 2001, with us kids gathered around it, like the apes in the same movie, staring up at it in amazement. Space Invaders had arrived. My love affair with video games had begun." End quote. These nerdy passions would only strengthen with age. They guided him towards becoming the youngest student ever to graduate from Warwick University with a degree in film and literature. He then served as a writer on the ITV crime show LCID, starring Alfred Molina. His first attempt at a local film production company in his native northern England, called Fredbear Films, flopped. He did, however, continue to find work, leveraging his writing success into an opportunity to direct a documentary on the English comic book artist and writer Al Davison titled The Spiral Cage. He then seized the opportunity to have his work featured on the Tynes T television series New Voices, a television show dedicated to featuring the work of local writers from the northeast of England. He directed an episode based on his script titled Speed, which followed 3 young people in Tyneside engaging in car theft and joyriding. The episode's airing drew the outrage of Northumbria Police Traffic Department Chief Superintendent Bob Binsley, who condemned the program, stating, quote, "I watched this so-called drama which was screened on Tyne T's television on Thursday night and was appalled by the contents. This drama was a charter for car crime. It showed clearly how to break into vehicles and all the steps criminals can take to cover up after a car crime offense. It was supposed to have some social significance about 3 unemployed young people's plight, but it had no relevance other than to incite crime." End quote. He also called for new legislation that would prosecute any media that, quote, "incites crimes to be committed," end quote. Tyne T's television defended the program, pointing to the fact there were no public complaints about the show, nor were they showing anything that could be termed as quote-unquote the tricks of the trade, nor did they believe it glorified car theft, instead believing it featured a moral message against such crimes. Part of the reason such an aggressive reaction was triggered by Anderson's show was the fact of life that joyriding and ram raiding were becoming for his hometown. Newcastle was labeled the car crime capital of England, with £111 million of vehicles having been stolen in the region by joyriders in the previous year. That television work allowed Anderson to get some valuable experience that he would use to try and help sell himself as a director. To make such a drastic jump, Anderson knew he would need a script that studios wanted to produce, so he wrote a screenplay that was something of an expansion of the concept of his work on New Voices, featuring a look at the culture of the young people whose lives are caught up in the epidemic of crime plaguing the region. Anderson would take inspiration from real life, with some major events informing his narrative. The Meadowell riots of 1991 were a series of riots that occurred in September of 1991, starting in the Meadowell Council Estate in North Shields, which is east of Newcastle, before spreading across the region. The riots were sparked after a crash during a high-speed police chase left 2 young men who had stolen a car and were joyriding, Dale Robson and Cole Atkins, dead. There was also the high-profile ram raiding incident that occurred at the Metro Center in Gateshead, involving the perpetrators using, quote, high-powered vehicles to smash through the main entrance doors, end quote. These events and the general culture that Anderson had witnessed growing up in the epicenter of a crime epidemic informed the type of commentary he wanted to infuse his film with, stating in an interview with the Daily Telegraph, quote, "We have a government that denies there's a link between poverty and crime. During the 80s, we've bred an underclass, people who are denied any kind of voice. The northeast of England is ignored. The only time their problems are addressed or even noticed is when there's a riot. It's easier to blame the violence on shopping than to face up to the fact that we've created an underclass that turns crime into a career. We show this, but we also show the price, the bleakness of that life." End quote. His screenplay, which would be titled Shopping, which is slang for ram raiding into a store and then shoplifting, would be shopped around for years. He would meet another young, aspiring filmmaker, Jeremy Bolt, and form a connection. Bolt had got his start as an assistant to the line producer on Ken Russell's film, The Lair of the White Worm. He had also served as an associate producer on a few films and had produced the 1992 Rusty Lamarande adaptation of Henry James's The Turn of the Screw. Anderson and Bolt bonded over their love of American action films, especially Die Hard. They wanted to work together to make action films in Britain something they felt the country's film industry was sorely lacking. They would back each other as a producer and as a director-writer, forming the production company Impact Pictures in 1992. The short film The Big Fish was a 1992 short film produced by the company, but their first major project would be Shopping. The duo was able to secure international funding from several sources. Kazooie Enterprises from Japan would serve as a production company, with some financing coming from France, some coming from Channel 4, a British broadcast television channel, as well as some coming from German distributor Nef2, as well as Polygram Filmed Entertainment. The film would secure a £2.5 million budget, about $2 million US, and feature a relatively strong cast. Jude Law would be making his screen debut in the lead role, alongside Sadie Frost, who was coming off Francis Ford Coppola's Dracula. Sean Pertwee, who had worked with Anderson previously, would also have a major role. Sean Bean would have a cameo role, and Jonathan Pryce would bring some needed experience to the cast as the top cop. Marion Faithfull and Jason Isaacs would also both have cameo roles. Fraser James, Danny Newman, Lee Whitlock, and a young Ralph Ineson would round out the cast. Jeremy Bolt served as the film's sole producer, with Laurie Borg as the line producer. Barrington Fallon would score the film, with veteran cinematographer Tony Emi joining the project. David Stiven would serve as editor, having previously worked on The Road Warrior, a massive inspiration for Anderson. Jane Frisbee would be the casting director. Max Gottlieb would be the production designer. Art direction would be helmed by Chris Townsend, with Howard Burden doing costume design, and Alan J. Wands would be the first assistant director. Anderson wanted an experienced crew behind him for his debut feature film. This would be necessary for Anderson's vision to be executed on a low budget. His vision would incorporate a vast canvas of sources of inspiration. He wasn't sure if he would ever be given this opportunity again and wanted to run with it, cramming as much of what he loved into the project. A British answer to Boys in the Hood, with stylistic elements cribbed from Blade Runner, Mad Max, old westerns, and the French cinéma du look. He wanted the film to be stylish, have energy, and attract young audiences in a bid for multiplex fame. This played into the casting of Jude Law and Sadie Frost. Having young, attractive leads was important. Stretching the budget to ensure several exciting action sequences was important. Working against industry-wide assumptions of what a British film could or should be was important. This was Anderson's statement, what he wanted his debut to be about, to breathe fresh life into what he saw as a fossilized industry. His aim, which he stated succinctly in an interview with Greg King, quote, has always been to make a movie that would kick some ass in this country. End quote. The film's release would cause controversy. Accusations of glorifying the joyriding and ram-raiding lifestyle were levied at the film from the British press. The British Board of Film Classification refused to give a rating, delaying the release until after the promotional hype died down. The film's distributor, Rank, was so ashamed of the film they removed their logo from the opening. With these obstacles, it struggled to gain a foothold at the British box office. The film was released in several international markets across Europe and Asia, also getting a screening at the Sundance Film Festival. His experience at the festival would prove critical to his career evolution. He realized how much more his sensibilities were in line with American filmmaking and the commercial landscape of the American box office, leading to his decision to leave for Hollywood. The film received mixed to negative critical reception. One critic called the film a quote-unquote reckless orgy of destruction, a quote Anderson loved so much he put it on the poster. John Little wrote about the film in The Independent, stating, Quote, "If you ever wondered what the phrase idiot energy meant, then a visit to shopping is called for. Shopping looks good, moves fast, and holds the attention. Unfortunately, that's all it does. In a way, shopping's ram-raiding metaphor boomerangs back on itself. After a while, it appears less about assaulting the capitalist system for gain and more about the new wave of British filmmakers trying to smash and grab their way to feeling, which is both embarrassing and promising." End quote. Praise was lavished on the film even by people who disliked it for its visuals, soundtrack, and action sequences. Most of the criticism is levied on storytelling in particular. With that context laid out, let's discuss my thoughts on the film. Let's explore shopping. Films are evaluated by their audiences outside of the context in which they are made. Regardless of whether the film was made for $5 million or $50 million, what matters is that you deliver. Shopping delivers on a visual level. Anderson's debut showcases the immense visual talent he has. The nameless, timeless city he has crafted brings you into a bleak, post-industrial hellscape. The location scouting and photography of the film showcase the London Docklands in dismal disrepair. Anderson shows the awe-inspiring beauty in the decay of post-industrial England. Inspired by the northern English landscapes he grew up surrounded by, he was able to craft tons of breathtaking shots. The film's excellent soundtrack provides a great balance with the anarchic action and visual bleakness. It is an electronic hip-hop rock fusion that blends beautifully and helps the film's forward momentum. The fact that the film's beautiful locations and photography were accomplished on such a low budget is an impressive feat. It stretches that £2.5 million budget to get as many exciting action sequences as possible. These scenes are pretty well executed. I especially love the confrontation scene between Tommy's gang and the police, as well as the first police chase and ram-raiding scene. David Stiven's editing emphasizes the film's momentum. The action scenes have a small-scale, chaotic feel to them. The final scene has an awesome stunt that feels straight out of Mad Max. When Billy and Joe's car flies through the air and rolls, it feels like a perfectly fitting end to our characters and narrative. On a narrative level, the film doesn't deliver. The fundamental problem is the writing displayed by Anderson in his debut. The characters are thinly drawn cliches, flat characters with no rewarding character arc. Some of this was by design, to showcase the prison that is their lives, to showcase the inability for growth in a world that marginalizes them to the bleak, hellish outskirts. However, this is no excuse for the screenplay's reliance on tropes and cliches to provide characterization. Anderson spoke about his desire to showcase characterization visually in the film. This is an admirable goal, but it isn't executed very well. There are intriguing elements set up that never go anywhere satisfying. Jonathan Pryce plays the police chief in an atypical manner. You can tell he sympathizes with these characters and is feeling just as stuck as them, unsure what if anything he can do to change the situation. However, this is never properly developed, and instead just makes his character feel weirdly disjointed. At one moment, weak, ineffectual, and sympathetic, and at the next, fascistic and authoritarian. There is also the rivalry between Tommy and Billy, which showcases two different approaches to ram raiding. The one that considers it a way of life, a way towards doing business, executing it professionally, with the other representing the pure adrenaline junkie nature of the act. While this juxtaposition could be interesting, it is shown through weak visual language. Moments such as the conversation on the top of the building at the basketball court showcase the way Anderson attempts to accomplish his metaphors. The two characters are filmed behind bars surrounding the court as they speak about their lack of choices. This is a moment Anderson described in the audio commentary as quote-unquote high school symbolism, and this approach filters through all his choices throughout the narrative. Another interesting choice we see is the asexual nature of the lead's relationship. Where one might expect a more cliched choice of a romantic relationship with sexual chemistry, he goes for a love that is represented through the character's actions. Joe is clearly in love with Billy, showing why she sticks with him even after sensing the doom they are in store for. This has the tragic potential of a doomed romance, but is never given the time or emotional weight necessary to sell it. Jude Law making a quip about 90s sex no longer being safe is an example of the few ineffectual small moments we get throughout the narrative. This weak execution with characterization is consistent with the development of Anderson's desired social commentary. It's clear he wants to showcase the hopelessness of the character's situation, as well as the adrenaline-infused fun they have while joyriding, while also showing the bleak end that these characters' lifestyle inevitably leads to. However, a lot of the commentary is stated in a very basic way, instead opting to use those elements of the film as window dressing for the film's energetic action sequences. The acting of the film is a mixed bag. Jude Law delivers a decent performance, giving some depth to a pretty cliched character. Sadie Frost delivers an okay performance, but doesn't bring the emotional weight required to sell the narrative on a deeper level. Sean Pertwee is surprisingly solid in his role, giving a pretty fun performance, though his writing is also a bit disjointed as well. Jonathan Pryce does a good job with his underdeveloped role. It's nice to see Sean Bean and Jason Isaacs in small roles. Fraser James gives a good performance, while Danny Newman gives a weak performance. Ultimately, the writing in the film hampers the actors' ability to bring too much to their characters. The comedic lines that Anderson attempts are weak as well, with a mix of half-hearted quips undercutting otherwise decently well-executed emotional moments. Anderson has a love of action films, and it is clear through the film. The weak characterization, thin social commentary, and overall poor writing are de-emphasized, with the action photography and soundtrack serving as the core of the film. He wants to entertain his audience, seeing himself as a populist filmmaker, attempting to push the British film industry into a new direction, one that caters more to a multiplex audience than an art house sensibility. British cinema would eventually evolve, but without Anderson working within the country's borders. This would be his last British film moving into the world of Hollywood filmmaking. While there are obvious weak points to the film, overall I enjoy it. It has an awesome visual landscape filled with amazing shots. There are some cool action scenes as well. Outside of the context of the budgetary restraints of the film, it's still an enjoyable, fun, high-energy film. But given that context, the film is a minor miracle and a great debut for Anderson. Shopping has fallen off the radar a bit, but I recommend you go and find the film and give it a chance, especially if you are a fan of any of Anderson's other work. That's all for this video. Thank you so much for watching, and see you next week.